On a Tuesday in October, at 9 minutes past 10 in the morning, a man I had once promised to love walked into my office to ask me for a favor, and he had no idea it was me he was asking. I knew him instantly. You don't forget the walk of a man who once walked away from you. Douglas Hale still moved like the room owed him something. 17 years had thickened him through the middle and thinned him at the temples, but the smile was the same, the one that used to make bank tellers and school boards and me believe whatever came after it. He wore a good gray suit and a woman on his arm. She was maybe 40, elegant, nervous in the way of someone who wants very badly for a meeting to go well. He pulled out her chair before he took his own. He'd learned some manners in 17 years, or he'd always had them, for the beginning of things. "Superintendent," he said, warm, reaching across the desk to shake my hand. "Thank you for seeing us. I know how busy your office is." His palm was dry. Mine was steady. That surprised me, that after 17 years, my hand did not shake. He didn't recognize my face. He recognized the title on the door, and the title was all he'd come for. I folded my hands over a single sheet of paper that would decide the thing he wanted most in the world. "Please, sit down," I said. "Let's talk about your application." I held his gaze 1 second longer than I needed to, and 17 years came back all at once, like weather rolling in off a cold field. He didn't feel a thing. He had no idea he was already inside the one room he should have been afraid of. "My name is Margaret Callahan. Everyone calls me Meg. I took my mother's name back the year my divorce was final, the way you'd take back a key you had lent to someone who then changed all the locks.
I'm 48 now. I'm the county superintendent of schools for Muskingum County, Ohio, the office that oversees every district, every license, and every new school that wants to open its doors here. If you want to run a school in this county, at some point your paperwork crosses my desk. All of it. What I'm going to tell you happened across 17 years. The 17 years between the winter afternoon Douglas Hale changed the locks on a house I had mostly paid for, and the October morning he sat down across from me, needing one signature from one office in one county. Mine. Welcome to her silent triumph. Get comfortable. Every woman in these stories was underestimated by someone who should have known better. Hit that like button and tell me where you're watching from. Here's the thing I've learned about being locked out. Sometimes the person who changes the locks forgets one small detail. He forgets that the woman standing in the cold has a very long memory and a very good head for exactly which doors matter. Before all of it, I had a life so ordinary, I mistook it for permanent. I was 26 when I met Douglas Hale, teaching 4th grade at Lincoln Elementary here in Zanesville for $29,000 a year, and loving it more than was probably reasonable. He sold commercial insurance, drove a car nicer than his income, and could make a whole room lean toward him like plants toward a window. On our 3rd date, he told me I had the steadiest hands he'd ever seen. I thought it was romance. Years later, I'd understand he was simply a man who noticed which people could hold things up. We married the spring I turned 28. 2 years later, we bought a little brick house on Blue Avenue. 3 bedrooms, a maple in the yard, a mortgage that frightened me. And here's the detail that matters, the one I'd hand a judge 17 years later. I paid for that house. My teaching salary was smaller than his commissions, but mine arrived every 2 weeks like the tide, and his came in bursts that mostly went back out again. I made the down payment from money my mother left me. I made the mortgage payment month after month
out of the account that had only my name on it. My mother, Eleanor Callahan. She died the year before we bought the house, and she left me almost nothing but her wedding ring and a small stack of embroidered handkerchiefs, white linen, each one monogrammed in her careful blue thread, EC. I kept one in my purse, the way some people keep a saint's medal. She used to turn her embroidery over and show me the underside. "Mind the back of the work, Meg," she'd say. "Anyone can look right from the front. Character is the side nobody sees." Then came Lily, born on a snowy February night, 6 pounds even, with a full head of dark hair and a grip like she'd already decided to hold on to. Douglas cried in the delivery room. I believed those tears the way I believed everything then, completely and without a receipt. For 3 years, I had all of it. A classroom I loved, a daughter I adored, a brick house with a maple tree, and my mother's handkerchief in my purse. I thought that was the shape my life would keep. Hold on to that, because a locksmith can change the shape of a life in about 20 minutes. I found out the way you always find out. A little too late, and all at once.
There was someone else. Her name was Carol. She worked in his office, and working late had become a religion he practiced 4 nights a week. I told myself I was imagining it, because the alternative meant tearing my own life down to the studs. Women are trained to explain away the very evidence that would save them. I was fluent in it. Then came the Thursday, February, a week after Lily's 3rd birthday. I'd left her at my sister's for the afternoon. I came home at 4:40 with a bag of groceries and a lesson plan in my head, and my key would not turn in the front door. I thought it was the cold. I tried the side door. That key didn't work either. I stood on my own back steps in the snow, jiggling a key in a lock that had been mine that morning, and slowly understood that it wasn't the cold. The locks were new, bright brass, still shining. There was a note taped to the storm door in his salesman's handwriting. "Meg, I think it's best you stay with your sister for now. My lawyer will be in touch. Don't make this ugly. D." Behind the glass, on the floor of the front hall, I could see 2 garbage bags of my clothes. He had changed the locks on the house I paid for, while I was gone, with our daughter's crib still upstairs. I want to be precise about what he did next, because it tells you who he really was. He didn't just leave me, he got ahead of the story. By the time I found a lawyer, Douglas had already told our whole circle, our church, my colleagues, the parents of my students, that I had walked out, that I'd abandoned the home, that poor Douglas was holding it together for little Lily while his unstable wife found herself. He filed first. He filed for the house, and he filed for custody. And he did it with the calm confidence of a man who had rehearsed. I stood in a lawyer's office holding a mortgage statement with my name on every line, and I asked the only question that mattered. How is this legal? I paid for that house.
The lawyer, a kind and tired woman named Ruth Okafor, folded her hands. "Possession, Miss Hale. He's in it, you're out of it. We can fight, but fighting costs money." I did not have money. That was the exact second I understood that being right and being safe are 2 entirely different countries, and I had just been deported from one to the other. Here's what nobody warns you about. The cruelty is only the opening act. The arithmetic is the show. I moved into the second bedroom of my sister Dana's apartment, Lily on a toddler mattress beside me. I kept teaching, $29,000 a year, minus a lawyer I couldn't afford. And I picked up a second job, grading standardized tests at night. 3 cents a paper, hunched at Dana's kitchen table until my eyes crossed. On Saturdays, I cleaned 2 offices downtown with a bucket and a vacuum, because the math did not close without it. 3 jobs, a 3-year-old, a custody fight I was losing on paper, because paper believed whoever got there first. Douglas kept the house 11 months before he let it slide into foreclosure. The house I'd paid for, lost by the man who'd locked me out of it. He never made a single mortgage payment. Of course he didn't. He'd wanted the story of the house, not the house. Child support was ordered at $220 a month. Write that number down. He paid it exactly twice. The lowest night had a date, March 9th. Lily spiked a fever, and I was $300 short of both the electric bill and her prescription. And I sat on Dana's bathroom floor with my burning little girl asleep against my chest. And I did something I'm not proud of. I called Douglas. I begged. I said, "She's sick, Doug. I just need $40 for her medicine. Please." There was a pause on the line. I could hear a television behind him, and a woman's laugh. A girl's laugh, in my house. "Meg," he said, in the voice you'd use on a telemarketer. "You made your choices. I can't keep bailing you out."
Bailing me out. He had paid $40, twice, in 11 months. He hung up first. He always hung up first. It was the one thing he was consistent about. I sat on that cold tile, and I did not cry, because Lily was on my chest, and I did not want her to wake into the sound of it. And I made myself 2 promises, right there in the dark. The first, I would never again let another human being hold the power of life and death over my child. Never again stand outside a door that someone else controlled. The second, whatever I built from here, I would build it clean. Every board, every nail, every signature honest. Then I got up, because the fever wasn't going to break itself. So what does 17 years look like? From the outside, almost nothing. A woman driving to work in the dark. A woman driving home in the dark. Nobody makes a film about the years a person spends simply refusing to disappear. If you've been listening for a while, do me one quick favor. Subscribe. It costs you nothing and means everything. Let me show you those years from the inside, because that's where the whole story actually lived. The first year, I only survived, and survival was the entire achievement. I taught 4th grade by day, graded tests at 3 cents a paper by night, cleaned 2 offices on Saturdays, and kept Lily in shoes that fit even in the seasons when mine didn't. Douglas drifted out of Ohio entirely, a sales job in Kentucky, a woman in Tennessee. The $220 support order followed him from state to state like a shadow he never once turned around to acknowledge. He thought he'd outrun it. Write that down too. Debts have long memories, and so do the offices that keep them.
The second year, something in me turned over. From surviving to building. And it started with one sentence. My principal at Lincoln was a silver-haired force of nature named Frances Boyd, who'd watched me teach on 3 hours of sleep for 2 years without complaint. One afternoon, she set a cup of coffee on my desk and said, "Meg, stop hiding in this classroom. You're not a hider. You're a builder. I've watched you rebuild yourself in real time. Go get your administrator license. Come take my job one day." Nobody had called me a builder since my mother. It cracked something open. So I enrolled in a master's in educational leadership at Ohio University. Night classes. 40 minutes down Route 33 and back, twice a week. Lily in the back row of the lecture hall with a juice box and a flashlight and her own homework. I paid tuition in humiliating little increments, a course at a time. A 2-year degree took me 4 years. I want you to hear that clearly, because it's the whole point. It took me 4 years, and I finished it. Then I did the unglamorous thing. I learned the rules. All of them. Ohio school law, licensure code, funding formulas, the exact machinery of how a school opens, stays open, or gets shut down. Douglas had spent his life learning how to charm his way past rules. I spent mine learning how to be the person the rules ran through. I became an assistant principal. Then at 36, the principal of Eastview Middle School, the district's hardest building, the one nobody wanted. In 4 years, my staff and I pulled its report card from an F to a B. And I built something there I was prouder of than any test score. A family resource center. Right inside the school. With a food pantry, a clothing closet, and an emergency fund for parents drowning exactly the way I once had. I knew what $40 on the wrong night could do to a family. I made sure fewer families in my county ever had to find out.
That program got noticed. It got written up, it got copied, and it carried me, assistant superintendent, then 3 years ago, at 45, superintendent of the Muskingum County Educational Service Center. The abandoned wife with 3 jobs now signed the letters that decided who was allowed to run a school. Somewhere in those middle years, I stopped carrying my mother's handkerchief in my purse. It wasn't a decision. It was a healing. One evening, emptying an old bag, I found it folded at the bottom. Pressed it flat one last time, read the careful blue EC, Eleanor Callahan, and set it in the top drawer of my desk. I didn't need to hold it every day anymore. I had become the steady hands. I put it away, and for a long time, I didn't take it out. For long stretches, I forgot Douglas Hale entirely. That's the truth no one believes about outlasting someone. Building something real leaves almost no room for the person who couldn't. And then, on an ordinary Wednesday, with the first cold rain of October on my office windows, a manila folder landed in my approval queue. A new private academy, seeking the county superintendent's letter of professional good standing for its proposed head of school. The proposed head of school was named Douglas Hale. I recognized the name before my mind would let me believe it. Douglas Hale, applicant, for the one document he could not open his new life without. A letter on my letterhead from my office, vouching for his professional good standing and character. Let me explain the door he'd walked up to, because he had chosen the exact wrong one. A new private school called Covenant Preparatory Academy was opening in the county, funded by a family foundation with real money behind it, the Whitfield Foundation. The proposed head of school was Douglas. But under Ohio rule, a person assuming that role without a current administrator license needs a conditional endorsement,
And that endorsement requires a letter of professional good standing and character from the Educational Service Center superintendent of the county where the school will operate. That superintendent was me. There was no other office. There was no appeal above me that didn't start with me. To open the grand new chapter of his life, Douglas Hale needed one signature, and it was mine, and he didn't know it. His administrator license, he'd never held one. His teaching license had lapsed 15 years earlier, somewhere between Kentucky and Tennessee. He was, on paper, a charming man with a sales background and a foundation's money, trying to become the head of a school on the strength of a story. And oh, the story. That's the part that stopped my breath. His application included a personal statement and 3 character references, and I read every word. In his own telling, Douglas Hale was a man rebuilt by faith after a painful early divorce. He wrote, I am quoting the document, page 4, that his first marriage had ended when his young wife left him and their child to pursue her own path, and that he had carried the weight of that abandonment until he found his footing again. His young wife left him and their child. I read the sentence 4 times. He had reversed it completely. He hadn't only changed the locks on my house 17 years ago, he changed the locks on the truth and moved into a version of the story where I was the one who walked out on a toddler.
And here's why it mattered now, beyond my own pride. One of those 3 character references was his fiancée. The elegant, nervous woman who would sit beside him in my office. Sharon Whitfield. The foundation was her family's. She believed the reversed story. She was about to marry it and fund it and hand it a school full of children. He hadn't come back for me. He'd come back needing to be publicly, officially forgiven. His good standing certified. In front of the new person whose whole faith in him rested on a lie. Now let me put 2 numbers side by side. Because numbers are the one thing in this story that never lied. When Douglas walked out, the court ordered him to pay $220 a month for his daughter. He paid it twice. Then he ran it across 3 state lines for 17 years. The head of school position he was applying for paid $190,000 a year. And it hung entirely on a letter from the office of the woman he'd left on a bathroom floor begging for $40. $220 unpaid. $190,000 pending. I didn't gloat. I'll be honest about what I actually felt. Because this channel is built on it. A cold, wide, almost dizzy calm. The feeling of standing at the exact center of something that had been turning toward me, one quiet degree at a time, for 17 years. Then I did the thing I had trained a whole career to do. I stopped feeling, and I opened the file like it belonged to a stranger. I never wanted revenge. I wanted my life back. So I stopped waiting, and I went to work.
The first thing I did was the thing that protected everyone. I told my deputy, Alan Reyes, to run the file exactly the way we ran every head of school endorsement. Full review, no shortcuts, no thumb on the scale in any direction. Alan didn't know my history. Nobody in that office did. To him, Douglas Hale was just another applicant with a thin license record. That was the entire point.
If I so much as leaned on this file, every finding in it would have to survive daylight later. So I never touched the facts. I only followed them. And the facts, once we pulled them, told a story I already knew by heart. Douglas's teaching license had lapsed in 2011 and was never renewed. He held no administrator credential of any kind. He had not run a school, a department, or a classroom in over 15 years. His resume listed educational consulting, which, when Alan called the references, mostly meant selling curriculum software on commission. He was, professionally, exactly what he'd always been, a man selling the idea of a thing he had not built. But there was one finding that wasn't about competence at all. It was a matter of law, and it was not mine to wave away. When Alan ran the standard licensure background check, it came back flagged. Under Ohio Revised Code, a professional or administrator license can be denied or held when the applicant is in default on a child support order. Douglas Hale had an unsatisfied support judgment, 17 years of arrears on a $220 a month order, plus interest, certified through the county. On paper, it had grown to $61,140. It had been sitting there, unpaid, the whole time he was busy being rebuilt by Faith. That default wasn't my opinion. It wasn't my wound. It was a documented legal bar to exactly the endorsement he was asking me to sign. And it would have stopped any applicant with that record, in any county, on any desk in the state.
Do you see the shape of it? I didn't have to do a single thing to him. I only had to not do the one dishonest thing. I only had to not look away from a fact that any honest superintendent was required to see. Let me set the two lives beside each other, because that contrast is the whole spine of this. As his new life tilted toward a cliff he couldn't see, a foundation's money committed, a fiance's faith staked, a story built on sand, my office was having its strongest year on record. While he prepared to charm a superintendent he assumed he'd never met, I sat in an office with my name etched on the glass, deciding nothing more or less than whether the facts allowed his signature. And they didn't. Not because I hated him, because $61,000 of his own abandoned daughter's support said they didn't. I could have handled it the coward's way. I could have had Alan mail a form letter, application denied, see attached, and never taken the meeting. Deniable, clean. Douglas would never even have known whose office had closed the door. But that would have been a lie told with silence, and I'd promised a long time ago that I would not become him. He was owed the truth to his face, exactly the truth, no more and no less than any applicant would get. So I did the hardest and simplest thing. I told Alan to schedule the meeting, the applicant and his sponsor, Thursday, 10 o'clock, at my office in the county building. The same building, as it happens, on the same square, where I'd once cleaned offices on Saturdays with a bucket and a vacuum, for the money that kept Lily's lights on. That night, I told Lily, 20 now, a sophomore studying elementary education, home for fall break, only that I had a hard meeting in the morning. She looked at me a long moment, the way my mother used to. She kissed the top of my head on her way past. "Mind the back of the work," she said, and grinned. My mother's line, handed down a generation to a girl who never met her, and aimed, without her knowing it, at exactly the right morning. They came at 10 o'clock. I've told you how it opened. Douglas pulling out Sharon's chair, shaking my hand with a dry palm, thanking the busy superintendent for her time, not knowing the superintendent was me. I let him begin.
He was good. I'll give him that forever. He talked about covenant preparatory, about servant leadership, and building character in young people. And every third sentence he touched the word character, like a man who had never once turned his own work over to look at the back of it. Sharon watched him with the soft, anxious pride of someone who has bet her family's name on a man. Now and then she glanced at me, hoping I liked him. I let him finish. Then I opened the folder. "Mr. Hale, I've reviewed your application personally," I said. "I want to walk you through what I found, because you're entitled to hear it directly." And right then, before I could go further, the door opened. It was Harold Mercer, our board president, 71 years old, and constitutionally unable to walk past my office without saying hello. He didn't know who was sitting in it. He just saw guests and a chance to brag, which was his second favorite thing after governing.
He beamed at Sharon. "You're in the best hands in the state. 17 years this woman's been with our district. Walked in a young 4th grade teacher, and now she runs every school in the county. Superintendent Margaret Callahan." "I'd heard she was impressive," Sharon said, warmly. "Impressive?" Harold laughed and nodded at the framed photograph on my credenza. Me, younger, a dark-haired little girl on my hip. "There's the secret weapon right there. Is Lily not stopping by today? All grown up now, that one. The spitting image of her mother, and has been since she was a toddler." He wrapped the door frame fondly. "Anyway, welcome to Muskingum. You're in good hands." And he was gone, with no idea what he had just set down in the middle of the room. I want to describe the silence he left, because I've never heard another one like it. 3 words did all of it. Callahan, 17 years, Lily. I watched Sharon Whitfield lay them down, one by one, over the story she'd been told. The story she had written a reference letter swearing to, of a young wife who walked out on her husband and their child 17 years ago. Except the woman those words described had stayed and raised the girl and built all of this. Her eyes went from the photograph to me to Douglas, slow and disbelieving. It was the look of someone turning a piece of embroidery over for the first time and finding every stitch on the back a lie. "Doug," she said quietly. "Callahan." Douglas had gone the color of paper, because he'd finally heard it too. He looked at my face, really looked, for the first time since he'd walked in. And 17 years arrived on his all at once, like a tide coming in. His eyes moved, the way a drowning man's do, searching the room for anything solid.
And they landed on my credenza. There, beside a photograph of my mother, in a simple frame I'd hung the week I took this office, was a square of white linen, an embroidered handkerchief, monogrammed in careful blue thread. C. He knew it. Of course he knew it. He'd watched me press that handkerchief flat 100 times across the years of our marriage. He'd watched me carry my dead mother in my purse. He stared at those blue initials, and the last of the color left him. And I understood that I would not need to say a single word about who I was. The room had already said it. The linen had already said it. Here is the moment the story could have turned into a different kind of story. Because I had the speech.
17 years of it, stacked behind my teeth. The locks, the note taped to the storm door, the 2 garbage bags, the $40, the bathroom floor. Don't be dramatic. You made your choices. The hang-up. Always the hang-up first. I could have stood up and handed all of it to him in front of the woman whose faith he needed. He'd once asked me in a note not to make it ugly. I owed him no such mercy. I didn't give one word of it. Because a long time ago, on a cold bathroom floor, I promised myself I would build clean. And a promise is a stitch. It either holds when the weight comes on, or it was never worth making. So I looked back down at the folder, and I did my job. Out loud. Exactly the way I'd have done it for a stranger who walked in off the square. Mr. Hale, I can't issue the letter of good standing your application requires, I said, evenly. And I'll be precise about why, because it isn't personal. The empty 15 years in your record, the lapsed license, no school leadership experience, I could have walked with. That's judgment, and judgment bends.
I laid the certified page on the table, facing him. State code bars this office from certifying good standing for anyone in default on a child support order. Yours is certified and unsatisfied. $61,240. I have no discretion there, and I wouldn't want any. I couldn't sign this for a stranger. I closed the folder and set my hand flat on top of it. My hand was steady. It had been steady since he walked in. That's the finding. You're welcome to a written copy. I did not raise my voice. I did not lean on a single number. I did not smile. I simply told him the truth of his own record, the one thing he had spent his whole life outrunning, and let it sit in the room, quietly, keeping perfect time. Sharon stood up first. She didn't shout either. Money that old rarely does. She gathered her coat in her folder with hands that shook only slightly, and at the door she stopped and looked back at him. You wrote that she left you, Sharon said. You had me write it too. That was all. Then she was gone, and with her went the foundation, the money, the school, and the last clean version of himself Douglas Hale had left him. He sat there another moment in my office. Just the two of us. 17 years too late. Meg. My name came out of him cracked down the middle. He reached for something to follow it. An explanation. The version where all of this had been an accident. Bad timing. And for once in his life, the words weren't there. His eyes went to the handkerchief on the credenza, then to his own hands, then to the floor. I didn't help him find them. I didn't say anything at all. Some silences you finally get to hand back to the person who taught them to you. He stood, gathered the good coat and the useless folder, and left through the door he'd walked in so sure of. He didn't change a single lock on his way out. He no longer had one to change, and he didn't look back, because this time, there was nothing behind him that would let him. People ask if shutting that door on him felt good. It didn't. It just felt necessary, the way setting a broken bone is necessary. Winning that meeting gave nothing back. $61,000 doesn't buy back the nights I graded tests at Dana's kitchen table until the numbers swam, or the birthdays I worked straight through, or the bathroom floor hours holding a feverish girl I couldn't afford the medicine for. It doesn't hand Lily a father who sat in the audience at her school plays instead of running $220 across 3 state lines to stay ahead of her. My mother died believing she'd left her steady, married daughter safe in a brick house with a maple tree,
She never met the superintendent I became, and no letter of mine could introduce them now. A man can lock a door behind him in about 20 minutes. The cold on the other side can last 20 years, and no corner office, no name etched on the glass, ever fully thaws it. And there was no closing speech from me. I want you to notice that, because for 17 years I had rehearsed one, 100 versions of it. And when the moment finally arrived, I found I didn't need a single word. I never told him he hadn't ruined me. I didn't need him to know it. He walked out carrying the only thing that mattered, the truth about himself. And it was heavier than anything I could have thrown. Then I went back to work. There were 3 schools waiting on decisions that afternoon, and children behind every one of them. And I had earned the right to be the steady hands they passed through.
Covenant Preparatory opened a year later, by the way, under a different head of school, a real one, licensed, decent, whom I endorsed gladly because the facts allowed it. I heard Douglas moved on to another state, another story, another set of locks. Some men only ever learn how to leave. Lily graduated last spring. She teaches 4th grade now, the same grade I taught the year her father changed the locks. And on hard mornings, she carries her great-grandmother's handkerchief in her bag, the white linen with the careful blue EC. She turns her students' worksheets over to check the back of the work, and she tells them the thing my mother told me, 3 generations down a line that never once broke. Anyone can look right from the front. Character is the side nobody sees. So here's what I've learned, and I'll leave you with it. When a man changes the locks on you, he thinks he's decided who's inside and who's out in the cold. But doors have a way of multiplying over a lifetime, and if you spend your years building instead of burning, one ordinary morning, the person who locked you out will walk up to a door of his own, needing you to open it, and you'll get to choose, calmly, honestly, to simply tell him the truth he could never tell himself. That isn't revenge. That's just keeping the stitches straight. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.